Lots of people know what it's like to work in a bubble where groupthink prevails, ends justify means, and critics become enemies. Precious few know what it's like to work in a bubble where the world is watching and the boss has the button. And even fewer know what it's like not just to escape that bubble, but also to go back and pierce it from without. Our number one story tonight, Scott McClellan, meet John Dean. When Dean testified and later wrote about the sins of the Nixon White House as witnessed from his vantage point as White House counsel, he too was vilified in the moment, vindicated by history. He has since written that this administration is even worse than Watergate in a book he called Worse Than Watergate. And we welcome John Dean back to our NewsHour once again. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Keith.
All right, our interview with Mr. McClellan just now, your first impressions.
Well, it was a fascinating interview, and I'm delighted you gave the full time to give something more than sound bites. But my impression is, and it runs throughout the interview, is that this is what I would call from the Watergate days a modified limited hangout. And I say that because, not because he was malevolent in his desire to put it out there, but press secretaries, Keith, know very little in the big picture of what's happening at the White House. They're pretty much told what the policymakers and other political people in the White House want them to know, so they don't compromise themselves, and they can try to be honest as possible when they're out briefing the press. So that's why I think it's pretty limited, but yet fascinating for what it is. And he certainly does nail a few things down.
I asked you off the air if your reaction, your intrinsic reaction to this was empathy for him, and your reply was, I can tell him what he is in for the rest of his life. Tell me, or tell him by proxy through me.
Well, he's going to lose some friends, as he already has discovered. He's not going to get a Christmas card from the Bush White House this year, even though it'll be their last one. What also he'll discover is at some point his words will be very closely parsed, and they'll turn them on him. They'll try to accuse him of things he never dreamed he was involved in. This they do to discredit him at some point. If he's striking too close to the bone, they'll go after him. And so he's in for some rather interesting days ahead, and he'll find out who his true friends really were and are.
Matter of fact, he mentioned that in the makeup room, that he's already beginning to find that out. Is there an evolution in the process that you recall? Are there stages? Is it likely that he will come back at some point and say, yes, I told the truth in this book, but wait, there's more? Is there a sort of a long-distance climb down from this process? Are you so inside the bubble that even when you think you're out, it still sticks to you to some degree?
Interesting point, and good point, because as you do get distance and you realize the reaction from the first time you try to explain what was really going on, and you realize there are other things you might talk about and had better talk about, you'll get some perspective. So I think we might hear more from him. He's really, quite unusually, when he said who's he going to vote for, he's not saying I'm going to go down the party line. He's obviously thinking about where his life is, and sounds like he's something of an independent right now.
Part of that bipartisan Texas thing, his mother was first a Republican mayor of Austin, or candidate for it, and then a Democratic, or first a Democrat and then a Republican. Exactly right. So that explains that to some degree. But place him and what we have seen here in that historical context of the revelations about a still incumbent presidency, and just to take a starting date sort of out of thin air, pick June 25th, 1973, and just work forward from there. How does he fit in?
Well, actually, I think I've read all of the memoirs of everybody who served at the White House at one time or another, going all the way back as early as I could find them. Mm-hmm. And this is a very unusual one. We've not had, my situation was, of course, testimony. I was under oath. There was an intense investigation going on. This is really not in the same context, and I can't think of anything quite similar. I was thinking about press secretaries. The only one who's become anywhere similar was Ford's press secretary, who resigned over the pardon and is disquieted with the pardon, Gerald Terhorst, where he said that he was unhappy with what was going on. Ron Nissen, to a degree, was fairly frank, but he'd left office. When I look back at all press secretaries, this is probably about the only time I can think of a press secretary ever really coming forward while the president was still there and laying out some of the ugly truth.
Is there anything to do with this information other than add to the historical record? We've got the Plame outing, Bush's commutation of the Libby sentence, Bush's involvement in the leak. Do the acts constitute obstruction of justice or grounds for an investigation? Because impeachment would be the logical follow-up here, but obviously the clock on impeachment is running down if it hasn't run down already.
Well, on the obstruction, he told you he'd given everything he had to the special prosecutor who was investigating that. So I don't think there's anything new there. He will discover also in his new life subpoenas that'll come his way, and he'll have to be wrestling whether or not he really believes this mythical position the Bush administration has taken about executive privilege, that they could somehow block somebody from testifying. But as far as impeachment, I think we are too far down the road. Just the mechanics of starting it. And I didn't find anything so far in what the press accounts I've read that while there's a lot of revelation and a lot of troubling things in there, something that's going to ignite an impeachment drive. It'll take more than, because it somewhat is corroboration of what we already knew.
And yet it is it's extraordinarily worthwhile and greatly informative just by dint of who the source is. John Dean, author of Worse Than Watergate and Broken Government, and in Scott McClellan's story, we are reminded once again of the process that you faced in 1973 and 1974. And again, our thanks for doing what you did then, and our thanks for being with us tonight.
Thank you. He can look forward to a good life not having these burdens to carry.
Yeah. Thank you, John.